So welcome to Get Us Hall. This is the home of the Center for Liturgy, not this room, but our on the third floor. This is where we teach. It's a terrible room for the most part because there's no aisle, but it seems to have worked this evening. One of the things we like to do on Tuesday nights, we know that today was a very long day, and we're grateful for that, or for you being here at all. But one of the things we like to do is have a bit of a moment of sort of relaxation, to do something less formal than we've done thus far. And further, tonight we decided to be a bit more devilish in our informality. Not that devilish, I mean, I am Irish, I'm Catholic, I have a lot of guilt, but it's a bit more devilish. Tonight's session is going to focus on explicitly, although it's been a part of every talk thus far, formation for marriage and priesthood. But we want to do so from a distinctive vantage point. That is, we want to ask a priest who's been formative for the lives of many of the priests in this diocese to think about marriage formation. And we want to ask a married couple active in marriage formation to think about the formation of priests. See how devilish that is? Okay, it's not that, yeah, exactly. It's haunting, almost. It's my privilege to introduce, well, actually, before I do that, I apologize. I forgot this. Someone found a cell phone in the women's restroom. Or a men's restroom, I don't know. It was a restroom. Are you missing a cell phone? Then, yeah, all is solved. It didn't have a code, so I just took lots of pictures. Okay, so it's my privilege to introduce our panelists for this session. Joshua and Stacey Noem are married. That is not new information. But that's not the only truth you should know about them. You could know some things about their work. Joshua Noem is presently serving as, and I call him Josh. Josh is presently serving as editor of Faith ND, the Alumni Association's electronic outreach for the spiritual formation of Notre Dame alums throughout the country, and he does a brilliant job at it. Yeah, clap for him. Stacey Noem is director of lay formation for the Masters of Divinity program at Notre Dame. Yes. I couldn't say it, but it's true. More importantly, or not more importantly, but equally importantly, they were a lead couple on my marriage prep retreat, which they may not remember, which was, for the most part, the lead couples. There was like 2 excellent lead couples and a disastrous lead couple. And they were excellent. They were part of the 2 excellent. The other one was really quite bad. But their marriage has been formative of the marriage of my wife and I, because of their formation. That's not all you should know about them. Before coming to Notre Dame, and they're both double domers, which is a rare tradition that is not that rare. Josh and Stacey were campus ministers at the University of Portland, where they worked in the area of marriage formation together. They are also authors of the USCC blog Happily Ever After, which they write alternating or together, which is a blog that is both full of hilarity and serious theological reflection, which is difficult to accomplish. But Josh and Stacey should not be simply known for their work. Their marriage is really a gift to all those who they encounter. And you see in them some way of the nuptial life of Christ that makes you want to always invite them to speak together. Because in some ways, in speaking together, they're the best group of common speakers I've encountered. They finish one another's sentences, but not in an obnoxious way, which is a rarity amongst married couples. They really do think together, and it's a gift to be around them. Monsignor Bill Schooler, who is our non-married member of the panel, as you might have determined, is pastor of Pius X Parish in Granger, Indiana, which is basically South Bend, except you cross a line that I guess calls it Granger. At Pius, he has not only built and started from scratch a new school, which if you're a pastor, you know is enough to cause you sort of like a heart attack, but he's in the midst of a building project of a brand new building which will set the standard for years to come in the diocese relative to liturgical architecture. Now, you should know something about this diocese, that's not a huge standard, but he's easily going to defeat years of exceptionally bad liturgical architecture. He is a gifted preacher who instills in his parish that encounter with Christ at the heart of Catholic life. He's a beloved speaker to our MDiv community on campus, and is simply sort of the icon of a priest who, as Monsignor Heinz talked about last night, gives himself for the sanctification of his parish. He's mentored seminarians in being a pastor, and I've spoken at diocesan conventions, and it's of the presbyterate, and there's something very dear of seeing Monsignor Schooler interact with the seminarians. No one can be more formative as a human being I've seen as a priest than he can. To seminarians, to teach them what this life means. The diocese here is gifted to have him. So here's how we'll proceed in this rather informal evening, which now sounds formal. Josh and Stacey will speak for around 15 minutes. Then Father Bill will do the same. And then we're going to pause for a moment for you to write down some questions, and then we're going to ask them. This is a very open session, and I hope that you raise the things that have occurred in your seminars, that you raise the things that have occurred in your own thoughts. This is the panel to blitz them with those questions. So without further ado, these are our panelists, and they will speak.
Testing, great. We've been asked to pass the microphone, so that's what we're going to do. And I get to start. So thank you very much for the overgenerous introduction. It's all true about Josh and Bill. So to kick things off, I'd like to return to an insight actually that my colleague Michael Heinz offered last night, and those were the concentric circles of vocation. Do you remember him mentioning that? And so that would have started then with that innermost circle, that the reason our very most fundamental vocation is existence itself, right? That we are created by our Creator. And then that next circle being the call to holiness, which we would receive in baptism. Coming out from there, the next layer of vocation would be our state of being. So the vocation to priesthood or married life or single life or religious life. And then the next, perhaps we might call it a circle, a vocation of doing. So our vocation to work, how we serve in the world or in the church itself. And I think that this conference is very much about that state of being level. So I want to take a step back, since we want to be talking about what might be universal to marriage and priesthood, about the universal call to holiness, which is news to no one here, right? We're all probably pretty conversant in the dynamics there. I'm just going to touch on a couple things so that we're sharing that in common. We all have the shared call defined by documents and writings and the catechism in a number of ways, right? They might define it as sanctification or perfection in virtue or transformation or conforming ourselves to Christ. And my favorite is conforming ourselves to Christ, because it says the most about formation, how we are to be. And I like how-tos. I like manuals, and I like kits, and I like when people tell me exactly how to do something. And that's how I pass my SATs. So conforming ourselves to Christ. We receive this call in and through our baptism. We all know that. In baptism, we are sacramentally conformed to Christ as priest, prophet, and king. But to conform our lives to Christ is the endeavor then of the rest of our lives, right? Our vocation. So how do we do that in life? Well, we follow the example of Jesus's life. We live as he lived. And Josh and I are going to kind of set that up as being hinged on two things: love and discipline. And so I'm going to let Josh take over there.
So just a few words about love. We mentioned this in our seminar today, that any fool knows that marriage is about love. I think most fools know that priestly formation is about love too. So the work of formation is about precisely defining that love as Christian. And I think both priests and spouses know that self-giving love sets the deepest pattern for our lives. And it's the way in which we find new life. Now, for spouses, the object of that love is each other. So in a sense, it's a narrowing of focus, right? But it's also a widening indirectly, in the sense that the intimacy that the couple shares is a witness to the wider world, and it builds up the wider community. The priest, the object of their love is the people of God, and as Michael Hunt said last night, that's not an abstract reality, right? That's the people of God in the sense that if you pinch somebody, they'll yell. That's very concrete. So it's very wide. But I think that the challenge for priestly formation is that it must be small too, in the sense that priestly formation has to allow priests to attend to the people who have a claim on them, or to allow people to have a claim on them. Find ways to let the people of God have a claim on them in really real ways. So love, and to further that thought then too, love is self-gift and outpouring. That always leads to new life, right? So in marriage, spouses know this intuitively. This is cause and effect that you get very direct feedback from. So, someone experiences frustration at the fact that the dishwasher is loaded incorrectly, or not loaded at all, or whatever. Mostly incorrectly. I'm pretty good about loading it, I think. Not always correctly, though. But when conflict comes up, there's communication, it surfaces, and somebody steps out beyond themselves, and unity is reestablished, and there's intimacy, and, someone might bring somebody flowers once in a while. Yeah. But this is the new life that married couples experience in marriage, and so I think the challenge in priestly formation is to identify what gives life, right? How priests understand and name and relish the new life that comes from self-gift in small, intimate ways, in ways, and that's not in a self-gratifying way. That's right. That's in a way that helps them identify God's presence and to dwell in it. And then a final thought about love and self-gift, self-emptying leading to new life, that there's a relationship between commitment and freedom, right? So married people and priests are asked to give themselves away definitively in a public way, and to stick to that commitment. And so I think both groups need to see that commitment as liberating and not as confining. So, right, spouses must see that binding their life to another person in a small way gives them parameters in which to be more free. It gives them a context to give themselves away fully. And that's a way to grow into who they're created to be more fully. And so I think priests need to be formed to see the things that they've forsaken, not as a negative or an absence, but as a kind of liberty. So it's not just about being free from having to change diapers at 3 a.m, but it's about being for other people. It's about being available to other people in a deep way. And both of those come down to commitment, I think, right? So in marriage, it's the vows. And I think in priestly life, it's about promises, and it's about committed love. It's about those people that you let have a claim on you. And those vows and that commitment sometimes sometimes there's moments when that's what gets you through. It's that you've given your life away definitively, and that commitment pulls you through really tough times. So I think that's a challenge for priests to identify that as well.
So that is the love side of conforming ourselves to Christ, and I'm going to speak briefly about the discipline side. This is not an insight we've traditionally shared often in marriage preparation, because I think it's much more fundamentally about the life of Christian discipleship. Discipline is much more about that, and so perhaps more apropos of those remote or proximate settings for marriage prep. So the formation we should all be receiving throughout all of our lives. But I think the transition from that which is liberating is very important, because real discipline does liberate us, right, for life in Christ. So it's interesting to consider in this context. And the way I would speak about it would be in the context of Christian asceticism. So we know ascesis or asceticism is training or disciplining of our appetites, right? And Christian asceticism, then, is keeping control of our the appetites that distract us from hunger for God. So ascetic culture creates this perfect balance, never destroying or the mere destruction of passions, but rather their healing and their transformation, so they're rightly ordered. So there are two paths to think about with Christian asceticism, and I'm self-conscious because David Fagerberg's in the room, and I learned everything about this from him. So thank you. So two paths for I keep wanting to say liturgical asceticism, for Christian asceticism. The way of affirmation, right? So the way of the body, of the world, of property, of secular life, and the way of negation, stepping out of the world, poverty, monastic, or religious life, potentially. Now, affirmation, done well, recognizes, as C.S. Lewis wrote, that earthly pleasures don't serve to satisfy our appetites, but to arouse them, right? We use them so that we can celebrate those pleasures in as much as they point us ultimately to eternal pleasure, to that which is eternally our goal and the object of our desire. The way of negation, then, done well, recognizes that fasting from earthly pleasures is a way to focus that hunger, to focus our appetites on God and God alone. And there's no reason to call one path or the other the preeminent path of Christianity. Again, it's a universal call to holiness. These are two ways to accomplish this type of discipline. The gospel in its totality is addressed to all of us. So what do we share between us as far as priestly and lay in that formation for discipline? And I often think of the evangelical councils, which is interesting, right? Because traditionally we like to think of the evangelical councils in relationship to religious life. But Lumen Gentium tells us very clearly that they're for all of us. They're in the section on the universal call to holiness. And so I'd say it is this: evangelical councils, poverty, chastity, and obedience. Why are we all called to live them out? Because they put limits and boundaries on our basic human drives and desires. Healthy limits and boundaries that actually open us to freedom for God alone. So specifically, they put limits and boundaries on our drive for money, sex, and power. So poverty allows lay folks to keep relationship at the center of our basic human drives, instead of the drive for wealth or material possessions. We're choosing an orientation towards intentional or voluntary simplicity enables us to focus on people instead of possessions. It helps us understand what is of passing value instead of eternal value. Chastity, as you know, is often misunderstood as celibacy. They're obviously not the same. Chastity is sexual purity, and that looks different on our state of life. So for single folks, that means refraining from sex until potentially they choose to get married. But for married couples, it means not only monogamy, of course, but also keeping our sexual relationship free from lust or objectification as well. And for the celibate priest or religious, it means a vowed commitment to abstinence. But for all of us, it requires a certain custody of our eyes, of our thoughts, right? To maintain a sense of purity in a particularly challenging modern society so that we are focused on that which is true and good and holy. And then obedience, which is a fun one for lay folks, right? So if obedience is about submission of our wills to an appropriate authority, that might be clearer for those in a vowed or promised state, right? Making promises or vows to a bishop or a religious superior. And at first glance, we may not have the same structure for obedience, but as baptized Christian, the vow of obedience to God as Lord of our life is essential. We have an obligation, even in the vicissitudes of life, to actively discern and seek God's will for our life. And sometimes that's easier than others, and sometimes it's clearer than others. But if we can see what it is, we have an obligation to follow through with it. So those are our initial thoughts as far as formation being about conformity to Christ, and that's about love and discipline, and we share that in common with both the priesthood and married state. And I'm going to turn it over to Monsignor Bell.
Thank you. And Tim, thank you for setting me up for absolute failure. That was very kind of you. I have to be honest that I've had to learn how to prepare couples for marriage through experience. We didn't have much training in the seminary. I was ordained in 1974. And I was having lunch with a really good friend of mine not too long ago. He's an excellent marriage counselor in town. And I refer a lot of cases to him. And he was just shaking his head about all of the issues that these couples are dealing with. And he said, isn't there any way to have couples prepare rather than 6 months? Is there any way to better prepare them? And I thought that was a good question. I don't know. We require couples to come 6 months in advance. I'll talk a little bit about our preparation program process, but that's something that's bothering me lately. Can we do a better job of marriage preparation? And I looked at my own formation and thought, my formation involved 8 years, 4 years in college, seminary, 4 years in theology, and still I didn't get it. My classmates and I, there's a small group of us, we're planning our 45th anniversary reunion this Sunday. So we graduated from St. Gregory's Seminary 45 years ago. And I'm on the organizing committee, and we did a lot of research about where our classmates are. And some, of course, have died. And our research, there's going to be about 50 of us gathering. Our research has shown that one of our classmates is a bishop, and another one of our classmates is in prison for the rest of his life for murdering his wife. So we all had, and I think the rest of us are somewhere in between that continuum. That's where the rest of us are. But I was thinking to myself, 8 years of formation, and that's where grace obviously comes in. I was impressed by what you were the way you were talking about being formed by grace. And I think that in forming as a priest, helping to form couples, I've got to trust in grace, because couples come to us for marriage from all kind of different perspectives. I found marriage preparation, more than anything else, is evangelization. You never, ever know where these couples are coming from. They might come to be married because they think the church is pretty, and despite all of our rules about being a parishioner and things like that, or this is where they grew up, or this is what their parents want, whatever. My first assignment was St. Matthew's, many years before the venerable pastor there became pastor. And one of the first couples that came to see me was this young couple, and they just told me right off the bat, they had no interest in going to church. They had no interest whatsoever. And so I started to say, well, why? Why don't you go to church? And they said, because we have disagreements about church teaching. Well, this was in 1974, so the most disagreements that I knew about were about birth control and Humanae Vitae. And so I said, well, could you give me an example? Thinking that's what they'd say. They said, the three spooks. We don't believe in the three spooks. I thought, what are they talking about? Then I realized they're talking about the Trinity. And I was talking about, that's kind of central to everything that we believe. And I started talking to them, and this is one of the things I think we've got to be kind to people. We have to have our standards, but we have to be kind to people. And we had a pretty good conversation. So finally the guy said, okay, I'll tell you the truth, Father. My dad will give us a $5,000 wedding gift if we get married in the church. So I said, how about 10%? No, I didn't say that. No, I did not say that. So they went away. But interestingly, about 4 years later, there was a tragedy in the family. They had gone to a funeral, and they began changing their minds. And I eventually did officiate at their marriage, and I didn't get 1 cent for it. But I think that's the other thing we've got to trust in terms of preparing couples for marriage. We've got to trust in conversion. We've got to trust in God's grace working in their life. And I've almost given up on judging. I've almost given up on judging on who's going to make it and who's not. That's the first thing I'm going to ask the Lord when I die. what's my lifetime batting average? You know, I have no idea. I usually hear from the ones that don't make it. But I remember one couple, they were faithful Catholics, come to Mass, didn't live together. You know, we did the process. They brought me food. It's just a wonderful, I like that. It was a wonderful process. They cooperated with everything. And their marriage lasted 2 months. And it was because he was addicted to marijuana and nobody knew about it. She didn't know about it. I didn't. Nobody knew about it. By the way, the diocese hired her. I'll tell you who she is later. But it'll be our secret. So then there's this other couple. This is when I was at St. Jude in Fort Wayne. This is like 15 or 16 years ago. There was another couple, and we had the most difficult sessions. The most difficult sessions. You know, we give them this test called Focus. It's not a test. It's an inventory, but it gives us some conversation. And I thought, you know, I was very honest with them. They were very honest with me. I thought, this couple's never going to make it. And I kept trying to talk them out of it, but they said, no, we really want to get married. So I called them the couple from hell. They've been married 15 years, and every Christmas I get a Christmas card from the couple from hell with their children, and they all sign their names to it. I find that in preparing couples for marriage, you know, it depends on their openness. And the same is true in terms of my own formation for a priest. It depended on my openness. It depended on my classmates' openness. And another thing that I found was that a lot of my formation to be a good priest happened after my ordination. My first pastor, Bishop Crowley, was very instrumental in my formation. In some ways, negatively, he had a horrible temper, and I was always walking on eggshells, and I was so afraid of him. I think that, you know, those early 70s, those were dangerous times for priests. I think I was so afraid of him that he kept me on the straight and narrow till I could mature a little more. And even today, you know, a lot of things I do because I remember he taught me. Once I became a pastor, after 10 years, I taught in high school for 10 years. When I became a pastor, I became a pastor in a small farming town. And I came in, I was about 35 years old. I was at parish council. And at the end of parish council, the president turned to me and said, Father, you seem like a nice young man, but actually I think you're full of, and I can't say what the farmer said, but you go to the bar and have a drink with us. Well, I needed a drink by that time. And that also, people in that small parish helped teach me, you know, how to be a good pastor. And it was at that time also that I sought out a good spiritual director and went on retreats, went on workshops. Those things are what's formed me as a priest and then as a pastor. And that's why I'm so happy to do that for the young priests that are sentenced to me. I get the ones who really screw up and have to come with schooler. They're the ones that they're in trouble. And I found that's so important to guide them as I was guided. And I think that's what we need to do with marriage preparation. I think we need to look at some kind of mystagogical, you know, some kind of structured mystagogical pattern. We really do need to do that. We're starting that at my parish. We have a good director of the young adults, and he started what he calls a marriage enrichment program. And they do something once a month. Just last Friday, 30 couples came. The youngest were married probably a year. The oldest were 50 years. And they had a wonderful presentation, and then I renewed all their marriage vows. I think that's the way we need to go. And that's the real challenge for us, not only in terms of continuing to build up and help them understand what is a sacramental marriage. I find so many people have no idea of what a sacrament is. They have no idea of why it's so important to be formed. I work with the seminarians from the Master of Divinity program, and they've been very helpful. These young men, I'll get them to tell their stories to our couples. And our couples are just amazed. You mean you spend a full year just, you know, going away and praying, and then you're in the seminary this long? You know, and these young men who are their same age, yes, you know, this is my formation, this is what we're trying to do for you. And so in marriage preparation, just as I was formed by a team of people, I think in a parish we have to have a team. We have a deacon who trains couples. We use a program from Ave Maria Press by Tony Garasha, and we require our couples to go to one couple for 4 times, and they have a structured way of doing that. I find that very helpful, that sharing. Our director of liturgy meets with them early on, because if you meet early on, you can teach them what liturgy is. So many of these people have no idea what real liturgy is. If they happen to be active members of the parish, that's a bonus. But at least if you meet them early, you get rid of these crazy ideas. Like when in the 70s, Father, could we have Stairway to Heaven for our communion hymn? Stuff like that. I don't find that happening as much anymore, but it does help them form. They go on a day-long retreat. We give them focus, which brings up a lot of issues. It's a structured way. And I truly, truly appreciate the seminarians who help me. And so that's what I've learned from my own formation. I think that's the direction we need to go. I think we have a long way to go, but yeah, that's what we do.
So right now, I encourage you to write down one question that you might have for our panelists. So they've presented a vision of formation, both for the way that marriage can form priests and that the insights of priestly formation can be used in marriage. Write down any question you have, and they're going to field it. And that's why I punish them. Okay, so the rest of our time tonight is actually determined by you. That's the game. So you discern how long this lasts. So what I'll do is that if those have a question or a comment or sort of want to offer their own sort of insight, can do so. I will bring you this microphone and you will speak using it. Great.
So the question is actually for all 3 of you in different aspects. And do information for both priestly formation and marriage formation. Somewhere in the length of the formation, we're addressing discernment. And so where I would like to go with this question is with how do we encourage authentic discernment? So you mentioned that you had a couple that you would kind of were trying to talk them out of it. But how clear are we in communicating that? How clear are we in communicating to somebody in priestly formation that perhaps this is a time for them to pull back and discern authentically? So that we don't end up with invitations are sent out. I'm going to go ahead with the wedding, I'm going to go ahead with the ordination. How do we encourage that? And the other part of the question is in terms of the liturgy itself. So we can make the liturgy crazy, as you said, with a lot of externals, but how do we emphasize for them, both seminarians who will be ordained and couples who will be married, that the external has a deeper meaning.
In terms of discernment, if I sense that the couple's doing very well, I just affirm that. But if I see difficulties, and focus can help do that, it's not a test, but it does bring up issues that need to be talked about. And also, I'm in communication with the sponsor couples too. And so I will talk to them. I will frankly talk to them. These are the red flags that I see, and challenge them. They have a right to marriage, so I can't say I won't marry you, but I do challenge them very much. And I think the liturgy is absolutely critical. I think that's why our music director and what he does is so important. And we try to pattern the liturgy after the Sunday liturgy. We try to use those acclamations. We try to use, he gives them a list of hymns that people in the parish know and pick from these hymns. The more we can make it a beautiful liturgy and not just a show, the better off we are. You're absolutely right about that.
Just a quick thought. We have a story involving a couple who smoke pot as well. That's right. Yeah. But this surfaced today in our seminar. But that was a couple that I think we came closest to advising in one way against marriage. But I think we both agree that the way we would have done that is not so much outright told them no, but to raise the conversation to a point where they would have to arrive at that would be the only obvious conclusion for them to come to on their own. That would be, the only logical outcome. And so we did. The conversation proceeded to a point where it got to that point, and we sent them away, and we didn't know what was going to happen until they came back. And so they ended up working it out, and I don't know where they're at now, but.
Your question started with being about discernment in general, and I think it's just worth noting what we all know already, which is, by the time you're engaged, the tide is going forcibly in one direction. There's a significant social stigma to moving in the opposite direction. Does that mean we abdicate our responsibility in helping people discern? No, of course not. But I think it does acknowledge that the remote and proximate formation of everyone for vocation, period, needs to be attended to. The language of discernment, I think, can be kind of popular right now, but people mean decision making. Right? Like they don't actually mean discernment. They just mean I've thought about it a little longer than I might have thought about it. Or I want to seem like an intentional person. We get that in the Northwest a lot. But discernment itself is a skill set. That's not a set of skills, right? That we have to kind of train our youth into, and maybe make them more privy to what we're going through when we have to discern things. We need to be attentive to that with our children, helping them understand that it wasn't, here's an opportunity, we're taking it, here's an opportunity, we're not taking it. Like there's stuff that goes into that. So I just want to acknowledge that it has to be about more formation around discernment for everyone earlier.
I've also found in a number of situations when the couple acknowledges, yes, we have some severe problems, then I send them to a therapist. I said, would you please go? And I talk about being humble enough to say, I can't work this out, that this is going to be a disaster if we don't do something. And I think the same is true in seminary formation. If a formator sees a problem, you need to get some kind of therapy. So I think we have to offer them options like this, rather than just saying no. We try to lead them, and then the one couple that a couple years ago, the last one that I did the therapist, they're actually doing very, very well, because they were both willing to say, yes, we've got these severe problems, and the therapist helped them to work them out. They're doing well.
One more thing. I just appreciated what you said about options. It seems like, again, when that tide is going in one direction, it seems like folks feel like they don't have options, And so perhaps our role is often just saying, there are a lot of ways to look at how to proceed here. Here are some of them, like offering counseling, for example. So potentially that could be something we could do, after the fact when we see that more discernment needs to go into something, helping folks understand the world is not black and white.
My question is very related to what has been asked already, and I wrote the word discernment down. It has to do with, okay, if we took a statistical average, more people come from broken homes and troubled homes than come from wholesome homes, be they sensing call to marriage or to priesthood or to religious life. So, what I would love to see is if there were some tool, and I do spiritual direction a fair amount, and I just had a couple who hit the wall, and their engagement broke off. Um, Lots of circumstances in that. But if there were a tool that would help people be able to see that these are areas where I lack skills or where I didn't have good role models, or I don't know how to resolve a conflict except to blow up or shut up. Um, does anybody know of a tool or any, it's almost like any bright ideas on how to help people see much earlier on, oh, this will be an area that needs to be really worked at before they get that very far down the pike? Um, yeah.
I think just talking to them, I think humility more than anything else. And I work with a lot of couples from broken homes, and their mistake often is thinking, well, my parents got divorced, and that's not going to happen to me. Well, the chances are greater that it'll happen because they haven't had good role models. And one thing to do is if one of the, like, let's say the bride comes from a more healthy family, if the groom can interact with her family a little more to see that positive. And then that's also where the community, the church comes in. So many couples do not understand the public dimension of marriage. And I see more and more couples saying, I don't want to get married in the church. I want to get married on the beach. Why should I have to get married in the church? And to convince them, be part of this parish. We have offerings for young people. You're going to need that support. And I think they have a better chance if we can somehow, and that would be part of the mystagogical experience, somehow engage them with healthy couples. But I see that all the time.
We talked today too about marriage preparation unfolding in different layers too, right? There's remote, proximate, and immediate. And often the immediate is what we meet with couples for and work through in a formal way. But remote and proximate is all the formation that children get and that adolescents get. And I raise it here because I know a lot of people here are working with young people in a lot of different ways. And so I think it's worth thinking about marriage formation as happening in you can form people for marriage in the way that you help them lead a retreat, for example, or plan a youth group outing, and that has to do with communication, with honesty, with responsibility and accountability, being genuine and honest in your relationships, and taking a personal interest in the people that you're working with. I mean, this isn't news to anybody who's working with young people, but I think it's worth looking at the way we work with young people as part of marriage preparation.
I would just broaden that to say I think human formation is what you're going for, because that makes better priests, religious, etc. as well, right? So all of these are contributing to better human formation.
I appreciate what you've said so far. The difficulty of trying to prepare couples for marriage. There's the anxiety, I suppose, of trying to do that well. And what you said about the evangelical councils could be a great part of that formation as well. I appreciate that. In the seminar that I was with earlier today, one of the questions that came up among us was how, and I just wanted to see if you have any thoughts about this, a practical way to help couples to understand how they image Christ in the church, that relationship. It's so easy. It's a beautiful thing. It's this concept, but just what is that? Okay, Father, we'll do that. So.
What's my answer to that?
I mean, you guys have a lot of practical ways you do that, right?
I hope it's successful the way that I try to image Christ in the church. It's probably not. It's so practical, right? I mean, how do you image Christ in the church? You die to yourself, and that's met with new life, you know? I mean, Josh does not load the dishwasher very well, but the times I don't say that, that's met with new life, right? When I die to myself and my inane need to have the bowls go the right direction. If I choose to say that, he will respond lovingly to me and try. But if I choose not to say it, that's a good dying to self, right? But there are so many ways you die to yourself and they're met with new and abundant life. I think one or two practical examples quickly puts a couple in the right mindset. Like I said about the SATs, if you tell me how to do something, I can figure it out. So it might be, the practical example I'd give is giving them theology is great and then telling them how you've lived it practically so they can start thinking, oh, yeah, yep. When I don't get annoyed because we're running late, yes. I can say something or not say something. You know what I mean? I think that's the most practical way is to get their minds thinking along the day-to-day imaging.
We often talk with couples in marriage preparation about the marriage rite itself and how it's a public rite, and how they're ministering the sacrament of marriage to one another in the rite itself, but also every day of their marriage after that, which transforms their love then. It means that their love is taken up and participates in God's love. And that means that I'm ministering the sacrament of marriage to Stacey when I'm cleaning the toilets on Friday mornings. That transforms the way I see cleaning the house or doing whatever. Gives me new reserves of patience and energy and generosity. And I think that's participation in God's grace.
I've been trying something lately with the liturgy. You know, for those of us who officiate at weddings, love is patient. You know, Paul. That's a beautiful letter from Paul. But if the letter would drop dead, I could get up and just do it by memory. It's every wedding. So I've been trying to talk people into using one of the readings from Paul about wives be submissive to your husband. And I say, you know what? You'll get everybody's attention. You know, they'll be, and then that gives us a chance to talk about, okay, what is Paul really saying about Christ the bridegroom and we, the church, the bride. So I've been trying to make that connection with the liturgy because I'm tired of hearing the Corinthian reading so often. And it's better homiletic material.
Locked in.
Most of marriage preparation is obviously taking place within the context of a parish. And whether the couples that are planning to get married are actively involved or whatever, pretty much the encounter happens within the context of the parish. Priestly formation does not happen in the context of a parish. Yet that is where most of the ordained ministerial priests will be serving for the rest of their lives. What would you envision or even imagine as possible, or perhaps even from your own experience, in terms of at a parish level, that of lay involvement in a degree of priestly formation that allows not just functional things, but an understanding of the life of a faith community as lived in the concrete. Not that we don't have it at the seminary, and most of where I teach, we all are in a situation where we're involved in parish lives, but as priests. I'm interested in terms of, as lay people, how would you envision your participation in this, regardless of your own jobs, but what you do in terms of your life within the context of a faith community?
If I could make a suggestion before I turn it over to them, I've found that if a seminarian does a pastoral year in a parish, that's extremely helpful. In the last 5 years, I've had 2 seminarians who have spent the entire year in the parish. And working with lay staff, it's absolutely critical. and I would recommend that because they learn a lot from lay people.
I don't know if I'll get in trouble for saying this publicly or not, but I think the rare gift we have in our MDiv program is that priests are formed alongside lay people constantly. So all of the intellectual and pastoral formation is shared between them. And what does that mean? It means that they learn to collaborate professionally. It means they learn that there's non-competition in their vocations. They are in fact complementary at all turns. They learn to destigmatize one another or hanging out with a girl on a Friday night. You know what I mean? Like they learn all the appropriate ways to deal with what that means if they go hang out with a married woman versus a single woman, what you'd need to pay attention to in that, as do the lay folks. But most importantly, they learn community. They learn to be known before you're Monsignor Bill Schooler, you're just Bill, right? And so I know what you go through. I know you're a human person too, and you know how to know people on a basic level. That's cloudy. What do I mean to say there? Josh's language of people have a claim on you. I think it is important for, and I'd love to be nuanced by others on this if this isn't quite the right way to say it. I think it is important, especially for my seminary classmates who are now priests, I think it's important that we knew them before they were priests, that we have a claim on them simply as friends, and we want nothing more from them other than that, and they have a place to be safe in that. They have a place to be themselves and have their, their, I don't want to use the word mask or facade because they are fully priest. In identity. What's the word we want? Guard. Yeah, great. They can just put their guard down. I think that's important. So I know that that's not a reality in diocesan seminaries. I think that's a bummer, and I think we have a good thing here. But do you have a follow-up? Mm-hmm. Oh, good. Oh, good gracious. Give me the answer ahead of time. We can save all these people. Oh, do you have more?
Just one thought to follow up on that. I think, speaking as lay people, parishioners, I think we've always taken seriously our role to form new priests once they've arrived. And so, yeah, and that means making sure that they're part of our family life, that they're familiar with our children and the rhythms of our own family life. And I think the young priests that I've seen succeed in parish life have also found mentors, older mentors, in the parish as well. So those two things, I think, once a priest arrives, you mentioned a lot of formation happens after the rite. I think that's true in marriage as well. But making sure that I would, as a lay person, I would think about connecting to priests like that.
When you first asked the question, I wondered if it's ever possible for new priests to have their own sponsor or host couple in parishes. That's something that's never occurred to me before, that we might actually formally host a given new seminarian or priest who comes to a parish. I mean, if those folks are assigned to you, that's a lovely thing, right? You don't have to go out and do that. It's just never occurred to me before.
Hello. I know that I'm not supposed to do this because I'm moderating, but one of the gifts that I found, so I would like to sort of reverse it just for a moment as a married person. The person who's most taught me what it means to be a married person is a priest in Holy Cross who taught, he's a guy, Father Pete McCormick, who's now is the director of campus ministry. He's an amazing human being who, at the drop of a hat, forgoes all of his evening plans for the sake of the smallest need of those he's ministering to. And it taught me more how to live in my family than actually most married couples taught me. It was because we were friends. It was a friendship. I just watched him, an evening where the air condition dies in a dorm on campus, and he opens up his dorm instead of going to the bar in order to give the college students a place that they could be cool for the night. Like, to me, that was mind-numbingly strange and actually sort of formed me as a married person what it means to actually care for my family.
just as a note, the priests that get sent to us, the young ones that I see that have the most problems, are the ones who haven't had real jobs before they entered the seminary, and they don't have the people skills, the work skills, the shared experiences that the people around them have. And so that's what they struggle with. And it's a human skill that they don't have, not a priestly skill that they don't have. That, and they might think that they're the next level of incarnation, but yeah, that's, anyway. My statement question was more about married couples. As a parish with a large school, we notice none of those people come to Sunday Mass. And so, you know, they're sending their kids to private school because our public school system is very bad. And that's what they're after, is a good education. The school actually serves as a wonderful network, though, and allows those married couples to live and breathe and network around other married couples in the same situation, and they minister to each other because of it. And it's awesome. But they don't come to Sunday Mass, or they rarely do. And there's a certain percentage that do, but most of them don't. They come back for sacraments, though. They bring their children to be baptized. They bring their children for First Eucharist and get drug into reconciliation in the same year. Sometimes they fight for their kids, whether or not they feel that battle's worth it or not, to get confirmed or not. But so this sacramental prep ends up being our only chance to re-evangelize these people, other than the school events that they're already networking with each other at. We have a problem that I see besides these other problems, that they feel like when they graduate from the school, which only goes to 8th grade, they've graduated from our parish. And how do we attract them to come to Sunday Mass to get formation in the first place? Because, I mean, I'm a strong believer that liturgy is what does that. For adults, it's our chance, because I'm not going to get them to come to a, after hours teaching session. I'm trying to get them an hour on Sunday and can't get them to show up for that. So any clues?
It's the same problem with married couples, with engaged couples. How do you get them to start practicing their faith? And I think you're right. You just be nice to them. You're kind to them. I always argue that the best evangelization program that we have is funerals, when people come and they're vulnerable, and they're much more open. The one thing I could say to you, though, is when I came to St. Pius, we did not have a school. Now we do. And I know the struggles of having the school. I know the problems of people who don't go to Mass. But I can tell you, I know the difference. It's a healthier parish. It's a healthier parish with the school. Because what you were saying today, it provides a Catholic culture that wasn't there before. We had CCD, where kids would come and they'd hate it because they had been at school all day. And they had volunteer teachers who didn't know anything. I remember one teacher saying, "Father, would you come and help me teach the 12 Commandments?" And I said, "Oh, sure, I'll be glad to." At least the school provides, and our parish is healthier, so don't give up. I think that's the challenge for all of us. We can't give up, but don't get discouraged. The school is a good thing. I'm convinced of that, for all its problems.
One thing did keep sparking in my mind as you were speaking. I don't run a parish or a school and never have. I have participated in parishes with schools multiple times. But the thing that kept sparking for me, and I will acknowledge it's so easy to sit up here and be like, this is something that you should do, because I don't have to do it, is has anyone come across Sherry Waddell's book, Forming Intentional Disciples? Some of you are nodding. Okay, and you have too. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think in my mind, I'm combining what you said about this great gift you have, which is a Catholic culture that at least exists in the school, or the potential, maybe, for a Catholic culture that exists in the school. And Sherry Waddell throws out stages of discipleship. And in the MDiv program, we've spent time on the lay side identifying those and figuring out how to identify them in another person and kind of nudge them along to the next stage. So the only thing that's occurring to me is you probably have a wealth of parishioners who are in those same conversations, and if they knew how to have an actual evangelizing conversation, which is really just about trying to nudge someone into that next thing, which is often just invitation, maybe that's something to think about. But again, easy for me to say sitting up here saying that. You have something on that?
To speak to two sides of things. First of all,
Yeah.
I think that Stacey and Josh earlier in their seminar about marriage preparation, I think that you addressed this topic with, sorry, thanks. You addressed the topic with intentional listening and then engaging those couples in some theological dialogue and then equating what their experience is in theological language. I think that one of the big problems that we're having today is seminarians are being formed in high theology, and lay people are absolutely not. And so now you have priests that are thinking in high theological terms, trying to relate to lay people that don't understand that at all, and so you have this great disparity. So how can we kind of bring those two things together? And to speak to the parents that aren't coming, I'm fairly new in ministry, and what I'd like to say is what we've done is establish parent sessions as part of sacramental preparation, and we do liturgical formation and also spiritual formation for parents during those sessions. And they walk out not really realizing what just happened to them, but they're like, wow, this was awesome, and yeah, I'm gonna come back. And you start seeing those faces in the pew on Sunday, because now they're starting to put together that what's happening in my life is God active in my life.
That's a great suggestion. Are there others for this comment? Anyone have any other? Yes, please.
We started, we've had several retreats throughout the years, but Acts, I don't know if anybody's heard about that, it's based on Curcio, but it's just made a world of difference in our parish. How many years have we been doing it? 5 years, and I mean, it's a community builder, and people get to know each other. They get a little bit of theological experience. People give witness talks. I mean, it is the most wonderful thing that's ever happened to our parish. And people, I have a person-to-person program, which I used to make phone call after phone call. Now I have a database of all the people that went on Acts. I put out a need in 10 minutes' time, it's filled. I mean, it's just really beneficial.
We have Christ Renews His Parish, and that's a similar dynamic. And I agree totally with the parent prep. You know, you get them in there, you give them as much solid theology as possible, and tease them and bring a lot of good humor in. And it does. People do come back sometimes.
Was there another example or suggestion you stood up? I thought there was another hand. Okay. You're good? Thanks.
So this will be our last question for the evening, but it is so far away.
Okay, so thank you for all your comments. I was in the Noem seminar earlier, and I guess it's appropriate that it's kind of the final question, because I would like to know, I work with youth and young adults, teen and now college ministry. So what is, from your perspective, what is one thing that you wish people knew or were formed in prior to them coming to you for marriage prep or even discernment to the priesthood? So what's one thing that you run into all the time? You're like, wow, God, I wish that they had had some experience with this or been formed in this when they were in college or when they were in high school.
I actually have one. Prayer. I don't think people know how to talk to God. I don't think they have the first clue. Generally speaking, right? When you're talking about youth and young adults and so on. So when I have an MDiv student who's, the product of some of the finest educational and Catholic institutions, Jesuit, Holy Cross, otherwise, sitting across from me, and they don't know how to pray, that's got to be telltale for the general population. I mean, this person's self-selected into a ministry program, right? So I would say prayer. knowing how to talk to God and listen.
Go ahead, Trump prayer.
Oh, sorry.
How to learn to respect one another. You know, just basic respect for the dignity of the other person. I find that lacking a lot of times.
I had a couple thoughts come to mind, so you're going to get maybe 4 different answers. One of them is just basic self-knowledge. Opportunity for self-reflection. In our work with campus ministry, I found a lot of room for young people to grow in telling their story, understanding their own story, and kind of connecting the dots in their own story such that they could see God active in that. The other one is flipping through my mind now.
Oh, did you write it down?
No, I didn't.
Okay. You can grab the microphone back
Okay.
up if you haven't. Okay.
Well,
I'll get back to you on that one.
so let's thank our panelists. That the liturgical rites and their efficacy and their fruitfulness are dependent on a whole host of things that are not just related about the carrying out of the rite. And we really do see liturgy as a lens into the cultivating of a kind of culture in the church, a culture of evangelization, a culture of imagination that transforms what it means to be a human being in the world. So I hope that you saw that, and you're more than welcome to barrage our presenters with questions after this session.